Recently, famous intellectual and psychologist Jordan B. Peterson has been embroiled in internet controversy over his recent appearance on Jubilee, where it was one Christian, well, then just one Jordan Peterson, versus 20 atheists. And it generated a lot of controversy because it was bringing up confusion over Jordan B. Peterson's religious beliefs and his views on God. And this was very confusing for me too. At least it was. Today, I'd like to share with you a recent realization I had about the nature of God through my thinking about reflection and pondering over what Jordan Peterson defines as God. So, what does Jordan Peterson define God as? Well, Jordan Peterson defines God through a series of definitions based on what he calls the biblical corpus, or the stories in the Bible. For example, using the story of Abraham, Jordan Peterson defines God as the voice that calls one to adventure. In the story of Moses, God is defined as one who brings people out of tyranny and into order. In the story of Elijah, Peterson says that God is defined as the voice of conscience, the still small voice. What do these definitions have to do with someone who believes God is not just conscience or a voice, but an actual being? How do these two understandings, or can they, merge with each other? And the answer lies in not anything in Western philosophy, in Eastern philosophy. I want to share a story. So recently I was at my local church and I was talking with one of the older members of the community. His first name is Mark. Mark and I were talking about philosophy. At one point he said, "There is no thing and there is no nothing." At the time, this really confused me. Then I started to think more. God, in the traditional Christian understanding, traditional meaning the average layperson, is omniscient, omnipotent, all-powerful, and exists outside of space and time. Passages in the Gospels and other passages from various Christian fathers that say that there is a God within you. In unificationism, this is called the original mind. The original mind, when fully flourishing, allows for human beings to become embodiments of God. Not God himself, but embodiments of God. This is why unification teaches that while Jesus is not God himself, Jesus is an embodiment of God. Jesus is the first embodiment of God. Going back to this idea of there is no thing and there is no nothing, Mark explained to me that what this means is that when one enters a state of full presence, thinking thoughts, but just fully in the act of thinking, fully present, no past, no future, no past thoughts, no future thoughts. Just the pure act of thinking is done through practices such as meditation, yoga, etc. By getting to this sort of state, there is no separation between things. For example, the book over here, the blue one, and the purple book over there, those are separate. But when you enter this state of full presence, this man Mark was sharing with me how everything becomes connected. There is no separation. There is no space between a table and a chair. It's all linked. It's all connected. And it's the same with human beings. And it occurred to me, could this be the way that God exists? Let me explain. If there is a God within, and there is a God outside of us, outside the universe, outside space and time, how are those two teachings embedded in the Bible? Embedded in, for example, unificationism, or certain Eastern traditions, certain works of Aristotle and Plato? How is this idea of the God within and the God outside linked and actually one and the same? And to answer this question, we have to think about what it is to talk to capital G God. To talk. Prayer's equivalent is meditation. But in the West, we typically resort to prayer in our religious and internal practices. So when one prays, sometimes, whether it's at a church or you're just in your room, things will be said spontaneously that you did not plan for. When one is giving a sermon, sometimes words will come out of their mouth and people will say afterwards, that was totally inspired by God. And the person speaking would say, well, I didn't plan to say that. And when you're praying, you're supposedly connecting and talking to God. Where did these words come from? Because on the one hand, traditional religious believers say Well, it came from God. It was inspired by God. But on the other hand, those words came out of your mouth during your act of prayer. What is prayer? If we think of prayer as an equivalent to meditation, and we take some meditation principles into prayer, we find that prayer, like meditation, is a way to enter this state of pure presence. No past, no future, no thought, no going to think, just pure thinking, just pure present existence. And that is a state where things do not appear to be separate anymore. So when you pray, when you're speaking spontaneously, yes, you are saying it. What part of you is saying it? Going back to Jordan Peterson's definition of what God is. If God is the voice of conscience, it's call to adventure. Those are things that both happen in a universal sense and within ourselves, that we do. So there is a God within us. When we're not in the state of presence, things appear separate. When we are not in a state of presence, there is a thing and there is nothing. There is separation, and that goes for God. The separation exists in our perception, in our state of being, when we're not fully present, when we're in the past, in the future, where there is a separation between the God within and the God, capital B, being. What is prayer? Prayer is bridging the gap so that the God within and the God outside are one in the same. The God within and the God without are one experience, one entity, one being that one is connecting to, one consciousness, one energy, however you want to describe it. And I think this holds the key to bridging the gap between the understanding that God is within us and the understanding that God is a being with a will and a heart, between the traditional Christian understanding of God and Jordan Peterson's understanding of God. Because Jordan Peterson's definitions of God all originate within the human being, not the supernatural being that the average, maybe lay, traditional Christian believer would understand. However, when we realize that when one is in a full state of presence, which can only be described so much because it's an experience meditating, it's an experience praying, it's an experience of having spontaneity of your words and your actions in that full present state. There's only so much I can say about it, or anyone can say about it. It is an experience. But it is this experience in my process of coming to this understanding that bridges the gap between Jordan Peterson's definition of God and the traditional Christian understanding of God. The gods that they're talking about are one and the same. It's just that Jordan Peterson focuses more on the God within and translates and perceives the biblical stories from that perspective, because Jordan Peterson is a psychologist. Jordan Peterson comes from the Jungian school and considers himself a disciple of Carl Jung. And Carl Jung was all about how stories of all types, of all different religions, play out in the human collective consciousness and in the human individual consciousness, and how even those are one and the same. But Jordan Peterson, because he is a psychologist, it is more difficult for him to ascribe the biblical stories to a supernatural God. So he focuses on the perspective of the God within, of the still small voice, of the voice that calls one to adventure. And the traditional Christian is on the other side of that, where they perceive God as a more omnipresent, omnipotent, all-powerful being that exists outside space and time. When one enters that state of presence, they are one and the same. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share the video. Have a nice day.